The Office of the Prime Minister Press Office is the primary liaison between the Fourth Estate and the Office of the Prime Minister and Cabinet.
Every day, we are working to build a more inclusive economy and a stronger, safer country.
Hear all of the latest developments as the Davis administration carries out the broad mandate of progress and change. Our live weekly press briefings provide full access to current newsmakers on the most topical issues of the day. We facilitate prompt responses from cabinet ministers on the latest reports and get answers on the issues that matter to you.
Will any penalties be levied against the
OPM Press Now, keeping you in the know. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in and attending our first press briefing of 2025. As always, it's good to see all of you, and I just want to wish you the very best for the year ahead. This morning, we are talking cost of living. As you know, Prime Minister Davis delivered a national address last evening detailing one of the most important priorities of the Davis administration, which is in fact lowering the cost of living for Bahamians. This morning we are joined by the Minister for Economic Development, Senator Michael Halkitis, who will tell us what the VAT reductions announced by the Prime Minister will mean for consumers and what all of this will mean for the economy. We're also very happy to be joined by someone we don't see in these parts too often, but we're very happy to see Senator Barry Griffin. He is Deputy Chair of the Bahamas Trade Commission, and you would have heard in the Prime Minister's remarks as well 3 trade-related initiatives: the National Trade Diversification Program, introduction of competition legislation, and the launch of the National Price Comparison app. And we will tell you what impact those 3 components will have as well. So right now, without further ado, I welcome to the podium the Minister and Senator Michael Halkitis.
Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, and Happy New Year. So happy to see all of you here. I will just make a few opening comments and then open for questions, and then allow Senator Griffin to speak about the trade-related matters. As was said by Mrs. Adley, in the Prime Minister's speech last night, he addressed one of the issues that has been vexing so many Bahamians, and that is the cost of living. And he reiterated that we understand and, of course, feel the struggle that many Bahamians are experiencing in terms of cost of living, not only when it comes to food costs, but he also touched on the high cost of electricity and the government's initiatives in that area, investments in transmission and distribution as well as generation, and the move to cleaner, cheaper, more efficient fuels, and as well an acceleration of the government's investment and move to alternative energy, renewable sources of energy. And this electricity reform will impact, of course, both New Providence and the Family Islands, and is expected to benefit businesses and consumers, and indeed trickle throughout the entire economy. And I think I can say Bahamians are already feeling the impact of those lower electricity costs. Prime Minister also touched on the high cost of housing and some of the initiatives that the government is undertaking in that area, including piloting a rent-to-own program and as well exploring ways to incentivize the private sector to build more homes. I think what, of course, caught most people's attention was the announcement of the reduction in VAT on all food sold in the food stores, and as well importation of food at the border. The Prime Minister indicated that we, of course, recognize the impact that this is having, high cost of food is having on the population, and where there are a lot of things that are not within our control, we are taking this step which is within our control to do that reduction. In announcing the reduction, the Prime Minister also recognized that because we import so much, the cost of, all our imports, including food, has, accelerated. The costs have gone up, and we see, similar sentiments expressed in the United States by their consumers about the high cost of groceries. This is an initiative to reduce the cost to families. And Prime Minister also spoke about initiatives in the area of agriculture. So whereas short-term, this impact will be felt immediately when it's implemented on April 1st, and the reason we have that period before the implementation is to ensure that the merchants can make the necessary adjustments to their systems, and as well it gives us an opportunity to educate the public more about what they can expect. This is in continuation of our moves to see how we can lower the cost of living. In July 2022, some of you might recall the government removed duty on a number of fruits and vegetables. That was in that 2022-2023 budget, where some were eliminated, some were taken down to 5%. In that budget, the duty on eggs was reduced from 30% to 5%, and I mention that specifically because I know eggs has been the price of eggs has been a topic of conversation. And also in that budget, the government reduced the duty on chicken parts, leg quarters, wings, etc., the parts that are most consumed, from 30% to 10%. And those were efforts to, again, control what government can control as far as its taxation, and this is another effort to do so. I would just in closing this part of what I have to say, I just want to stress that this reduction applies to all food that is purchased in the food store, with the exception, as the Prime Minister said, of cooked food or prepared food that's served in the deli, all food. And so we expect this impact to be widespread, and we expect the consumers to feel it. This is another step in our efforts. I think the Prime Minister described it as, sharing in some of the benefits of the improvement in our economy with the Bahamian people, giving something back. And so we're very happy to be able to do this. And I'll stop there and take any questions you might have on this matter. Hi.
I know the PM said that the reduction.
What's your name? Okay.
Fisherman's Tribune.
I'm Fisherman's Tribune.
I know that the PM said the reduction would not cause the government to miss any of its fiscal targets. But can you say how much revenue will be foregone from?
We estimate $30 million.
Another question. Can you speak to the timing of this price cut? Especially as, this administration would have put VAT back on breadbasket items that the former administration had in place, and now you're going to reduce the VAT on groceries. Is that not kind of like saying that the FNM had it right?
No, it's not saying that they had it right at all. Let me give you some, and matter of fact, it's saying they had it absolutely wrong, and let me tell you why. When the FNM did what they said, they took VAT off of breadbasket items and some other items. VAT in the country at that time was 7.5% across the board. Our view at the time in introducing VAT, and VAT is 10 years old this month. Happy birthday, VAT. When we introduced VAT, our philosophy was a low rate, but across the board with few exceptions. Why did we do that? It was new. We were just establishing the Department of Inland Revenue to oversee this whole implementation of VAT. It was something totally new for us. We wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So we came in at a low rate, 7.5%, everything included. At the same time we implemented VAT, it was January 1st, 2015. A few months before, we increased the minimum wage, and we increased social service assistance across the board. Anyone who was getting social service assistance, we increased it by 10%. That was before the implementation of VAT at 7.5%, because we felt, okay, for those vulnerable people who are making minimum wage, we increased the minimum wage. We increased social service assistance. We implemented VAT at 7.5% across the board. Keep it simple. We're just learning this. The F&M came in 2018, and they came in 2017, and in 2018, they took VAT off the 22 bread basket items and a few others that they added. But they increased the rate from 7.5% to 12%, and I don't want that to be lost on anybody. So the day before, you were paying 7.5% VAT on everything. The day after they implemented this, all of a sudden you're paying 0 on about 20 or 30 items, but you go from paying 7.5% on everything else to 12% on everything else. A massive, it was a 60% increase. And so when we came to office, even before we came to office, what we said we will do is we will reduce the rate of VAT from 12% to 10%. We can't go back to 7.5% because during that time, when the F&M increased it from 7.5 to 12, the spending has gone up, and so you require this revenue. But we said we'll reduce it from 12% to 10%. We said, oh, you can't do it, the economy will crash, et cetera, et cetera. We came in, we went back to 10%, a lower rate than they had, but we got rid of the exemptions at that time. And so now we're coming back and saying our economy has performed well. Our finances, you know, we went from debt to GDP of 100% or so in 2021 now to the mid-70s. Our revenue is improving. We think we have, we're doing, the economy is growing. We're doing a fairly good job of controlling expenditure. We recently implemented the domestic minimum top-up tax that we expect beginning next year, not this, the 2025-2026 budget cycle, where we will get some money. So now what we're saying is we have expertise in the area of administration. We've been doing it for 10 years. So now we're saying we can go and give that concession, not on 22 bread basket items, all food that you consume, that you purchase from the food store. So we're not saying they had it right. We're saying that at this time, our economy has recovered, our finances have recovered. We can give this concession to the people.
Just to clarify, this measure, is this permanent or just for a certain
It's permanent. It's permanent. All right? It's permanent. It's permanent.
Does it extend to the entire supply chain?
Yes. So if, for example, if you go to Miami and bring back a pallet of grocery, when you come to the port or when you bring it in, you'll be charged 5% VAT.
I know that you talked about the question regarding the F&M, but I know the PLP has argued for a low rate and a broad-based approach to
Yes.
tax is the best practice. What do you see the general critics who say this latest news undermines the PLP's credibility as the party that is most capable of administering the VAT system with this move?
I don't know where that came from, but I totally reject it. I think it's a nonsensical argument. We introduced it, we've managed it, and we continue to do so. Those who were managing before us took us to a situation where when we came to office, the country was virtually on the brink. No financial institution wanted to even see us, all right? Everybody globally had come to the conclusion that the Bahamas was going to the IMF. If you do a little Google search and you see back in 2022, you had the renowned Caribbean economist Mala Dukaran saying that the Bahamas will be in the hands of the IMF in a year or so. So I say that to say we don't dwell on it a lot, but the situation was pretty dire. You might recall the spokesman for finance for the opposition getting up and crowing in the House of Assembly that, oh, the bonds of the sovereign bonds of the government of the Bahamas are trading at distressed levels, saying it with a lot of glee, as if, that was something good. Now, if you ever get a chance to talk to investors, they'll tell you that the bonds of the government of the Bahamas has performed amongst the best in the world over the last 18 months. And so I say all that to say, we have managed as the Prime Minister said, quoting the IMF, a remarkable recovery. They used even more glowing language, but they didn't write it down, but a remarkable recovery. So any suggestion that the Progressive Liberal Party does not know how to manage the economy or manage VAT or anything. I totally reject it. It's nonsensical. What the Bahamian people need to be aware of, those on the other side who would say anything to get elected or to say anything that they think will improve their chances of being elected.
There are other groups who are questioning the timing of
Okay.
this initiative, right? And I know you outlined recent successes
Yes.
in the economy, which to me suggests that government thought now is the best feasible time to do it. But there are those who say this is simply political. What are your thoughts on those?
Say it's simply political, as if a political ploy. I'll just say this, elections are due in the Bahamas in 2026. That's over a year from now, almost 2 years from now. I'll say this, we have always, as I said in response to Ms. Boleg's question, we believe that this is the right time. Our finances are stabilized. We believe we can withstand it. Sorry, forgot your last name. Ms. Simmons from the Tribune asked about how much it would cost, $30 million. We have been very aggressive over the last 3 years in when we talk about improved revenue administration. Going after large delinquent taxpayers. We've had a tremendous amount of success in that area, particularly in real property tax. Other large taxpayers who had issues with the government, where we have gone through the process of audit and assessment, even through the appeal process. And so we have reaped some dividends, so to speak, in terms of our financial management. And so this is the time now to be able to do it. If it was an election ploy, then you wait until closer to the election. No, it has nothing to do with the election. It has to do with the recognition that the price of food is a matter that's on the minds of Bahamians. It's a matter that's on the minds of Americans. You recall that it was a tremendous issue in the recent U.S. elections, the price of food. And so whereas in the longer term, we have to make investments in agriculture. We have to, and I hope Senator Griffin can be able to speak about some of the trade issues. We have to make some issues and some efforts in the area of the supply chain. Immediately, these are some of the things that we can do. And to speak to the issue of timing, in 2022, which was our first full budget, we went in and we reduced duty on a whole number of fruits and vegetables, chicken, eggs, a number of things in 2022. So virtually the first chance we got, as an administration, we started to reduce duties, and that has continued. Food, building supplies, construction material, clothing, the whole raft. It's been a constant. Every chance we got in terms of the budget, we've been reducing. And that is contrary to this narrative that's out there about, tax, tax, tax. If you look at it and study it, and I can share all the information with you, virtually all of the revenue measures that impact Bahamians has been on the reduction side. Where increases have come, it's been in the area of cruise departure tax, that impacts mostly non-Bahamians.
One of us consistently advocated for the complete removal of VAT on healthy food, very basket items, supply medicines, feminine hygiene products, policies that they say were in place during the last FM administration and reversed by the security government. We make up of those criticisms, of course. There seems to be concerns about whether that's factually correct for you.
No, I mean, that's what they say. That's their policy. Their policy, again.
Saying to go to zero.
All right, again, but remember what I said in answer to Ms. Simmons' question. When they did that, they raised VAT from 7.5% to 12%. All right? So you can say, you can do this, make this zero, make this. What are you doing on the other side? What they have demonstrated is their policy, make those few items. I have 22 here listed on the bread basket, and there's some other ones that they've added, like you said, sanitary products, etc. They say make those zero, but raise everything else in the entire country, food and everything else that you purchase, increase it by 60%. So I think what they need to say, if they want to be totally honest, is to say, when we put it to zero, we raised everything else by 60%. And so now they're advocating for whatever they're advocating for, what goes up on the other side of the ledger. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind.
Were retailers or store owners made aware of this decision prior to, and were they on board?
No, I mean, no, they weren't, well, no.
So I guess what measures are in place to ensure there'll be no markups at the in the stores?
And you said there would be no markups.
On grocery items and on bread items.
This doesn't affect, I think another question I want to dispel is, what do you say your last name was again, sorry? Mr. Emmanuel. Is that this is a tax paid by the consumer. So, the retailers, whoever else, the vendors, they're not losing anything. Right? We're not taking off part of their margin. Right? This is something that's for the benefit of the people. So, they should, not really be concerned about something being taken away from them. All right. As I said, the question you asked about whether they were told beforehand, normally in these addresses when the Prime Minister's addressing the nation, those things are held until the address is done. The other point I would make is that the implementation comes into effect on April 1st, and we think that will be ample time for retailers, those who are VAT registrants, to be able to make the adjustments to their points of sale, et cetera. Yes, Mr. Hunter.
Good afternoon. Just one question, as simple as possible.
Yeah.
How does this slash?
I thought it was being simple.
How does the slash to these items directly contribute to lessening the cost of living for Bahamians?
Yeah, well, when you go and you purchase something, instead of paying 10% in tax, you're paying 5%. So.
And does this mean that retailers or wholesalers will be able to get a bit more products because they're spending less on VAT as well?
Well, if that's their view, when we dropped the VAT from 12% to 10%, our view was because again merchants et cetera would have to put out less at the beginning, even though it's 2%, it would leave them with more money in their pockets. So, yes, Ms. Boleg. They finished with VAT? Everybody? Yeah. Okay, let's do the one on tax first, and then we'll come back to you. Oh, ladies first? What are you saying? Okay.
I just wanted to get an update on the $10 million salary review that was announced in the last. How is that?
That's ongoing. So we'll have to get you an update. And so the idea was to review the salaries. The idea behind it is that in the public service, we are competing with the private sector for talent, for people. And the public service, traditionally, the salaries have been lower than in the private sector. And so the idea was to make a comparison and between the public and the private sector and see how we can make those adjustments. I'll have to sort of get an update on the progress for you, but it's ongoing.
When do you expect to finish the review?
Let me get an update. I'll have to get that information to you. You can reach out to me and I'll give you an update.
Yeah, so some people say the VAT reduction is a step in the right direction, but I was really concerned about the duty tax on vehicle importations, right? So I think it's at 65%.
65%, yeah.
What is government doing about that based on the recent outcry that we've been seeing?
That's not on the agenda right now. I know it is high. We don't produce vehicles here, and so it's not as if you can buy a locally produced one, but it has been traditionally a source of revenue for the government, and so there's nothing immediately on the horizon to reduce that. What we have been doing is encouraging the importation of hybrid and electric vehicles by lowering the duty on those. So they range from, I think, from 10% to 25%. To encourage, electric vehicles and hybrids.
Mm-hmm. How performance has been for the first half of the fiscal year?
Pretty much on track. We don't have the final numbers yet. The first half just completed in December. Pretty much on track. The Normally, in the first half of the year, the revenue is about not quite 50% of your total. It's normally around 42, 44%. And then we pick up because when you get into this part of the year is when you're getting the benefit of, holiday spending, and as well you have business license renewal, property tax, other things come into effect. Well, the payment is normally made around anywhere from now until April. So we are confident. We feel good. Of course, we have to always temper that confidence with caution because, anything could happen. You hear, we're a tourism economy. You have to watch out for storms. You have to watch out for pandemic, war, all those sorts of things. But we feel good. All right? Thank you all. Thank you very much. Ms. Boleg, you can reach out for that information on. All right?
Thank you very much, Minister Halkitis. I'd now like to welcome to the podium Senator Barry Griffin, the Deputy Chair of the Bahamas Trade Commission. You would have heard the Prime Minister refer to the proposal to source new avenues for manufacturing or importation into the Bahamas, I should say, and focus on allowing consumers to compare, contrast, and give them that advantage. So as we speak about the initiatives toward that end, please welcome Mr. Barry Griffin, Senator.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I think this is my first time here at the press briefing, so Happy New Year, and it's a pleasure to be here. So last evening we would have had a transformative and revolutionary speech by the Prime Minister of the country. I know one of the sort of sexier announcements that he would have made would have been about the slash in VAT, but the Prime Minister gave a much broader economic speech that talked a lot about the government's priorities and focus moving forward. So part of that speech was essentially putting more power in the hands of the consumer. So we talked a lot about consumer affairs, consumer protection through competition. One of the biggest things in our country is a lack of competition. As everybody in this country would be aware, we import most of our goods from a very limited number of suppliers in the United States, which means that there's very little room for competition on price, meaning most of our retailers, our distributors, they all get the same products from the exact same people, and so the power isn't really in the hands of Bahamian businesses, and hence those large and high prices are passed on to the Bahamian consumer. So one of the biggest initiatives that the Prime Minister would have announced is his support for the National Trade Diversification Program, which many of you would have been hearing about over the past few months. And so the program has been being developed over the last year behind the scenes, and we're finally at the moment when we're ready for a national launch of the program. So essentially, the government is taking advantage of the great trading relationships we have around the world, not just with the United States, but with Canada, with CARICOM countries, with countries in Latin America, with countries in Africa, and we're seeking to diversify where we get our products from. So we all know that the Bahamas doesn't, manufacture or make a lot. And we automatically assume that a lot of these things are produced in the United States of America. But the reality is that even the United States imports a lot of the things that they consume, and they then sell that on to us. So the idea, as the Prime Minister said, is to try to cut out the middleman. So for example, the most of the meat that we consume in this country actually comes from Brazil. But we buy it through American third-party intermediaries, which means that the meat that we purchase in this country is about 20% more expensive. So by cutting out the US middleman and going directly to Brazil for meat, for example, we hope that that 20% cost savings would then go on to the Bahamian consumer. And so the idea behind the Prime Minister's economic agenda is that we will replicate this firstly throughout the food industry and then throughout other industries in the country, such as the construction sector, where the Bahamian consumer will be able to save more money. So we think the push to diversify trade in the country is actually quite transformative. It's never been done before in the Bahamas, as I've said. We all can remember, we've been very reliant on trade solely with the United States. And so this is something very new in the Bahamas, and this government is going to spearhead it. Secondly, we spoke a lot about competition. just by virtue of the size of our market, there are very few players in a lot of industries in the Bahamas. And so certain anti-competitive practices may exist in the Bahamas. A fun fact, or not so fun, we are one of the only countries in the Western Hemisphere not to have robust competition laws. So for example, Caribbean countries that are part of the CSME, the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, they all come under the CARICOM Competition Authority. The United States has competition laws. Many of our friends and neighbors in Latin America, they have competition laws. And so we're one of the few countries in this part of the world that does not have robust competition laws. And so we intend to introduce that for the first time here in the Bahamas. And the idea behind that is that we'll introduce competition into the marketplace, which will result in more competition on prices for the Bahamian consumer. So we'll have more Bahamian retailers competing on price, competing on quality, and competing on variety. And that again puts the power in the hands of the consumer. Thirdly, we are promoting price transparency. A lot of Bahamians, we have complaints to the government that one day I go into the store and the price of something is $2. I go back in the afternoon and the price is completely different. And so we're going to bring legislation that also talks a lot more about price transparency, but also we'll have the launch of the National Price Comparison App with the idea that Bahamians can compare prices of a majority of products throughout the country in real time. So no longer will you have to go to Super Value here, City Market here, Solomon's Fresh there, Budget there, all in one day, so you can find the price of meat or potato chips or something that you need to prepare for dinner. The idea is that we will use price inspectors who already exist within the Consumer Affairs Department, and they already go out to these stores on a daily basis to collect the prices of regulated items in the country. They will now have the expanded task of following the prices of a larger breadbasket of items that we will then use to update this app. So Bahamians will have the benefit of comparing prices in real time. So it saves money, it saves time, and again, puts the power in the hands of consumers so that they can make better choices in terms of how they spend their money. So again, as I said before, the VAT slash is sort of the big sexy announcement, and we think that will bring immediate short-term relief to Bahamians that we think is absolutely necessary. But there are structural issues, more complex issues that we need to deal with as a country, and all of the other announcements made by the Prime Minister last evening intend to address those very structural issues that we have in this country. So with that said, I'll open up the floor for any questions or comments that you may have.
About the competition law, I know that something was drafted by the previous administration before it was abandoned around the time of that World Trade Organization pullout thing that happened. So are you going to expand on that legislation, or is this brand new legislation that's being drafted?
So throughout the course of various administrations, there would have been numerous pieces of legislation that was discussed by the realm of competition law. So the draft that we are now working on is a draft that was actually produced in 2016 under the Christie administration, and the draft that was then subsequently used in 2017 under the Minnis administration. So that piece of legislation will form the basis of our competition legislation. But in the National Trade Facilitation Committee, we have a subcommittee that deals specifically on competition, and we have competition and legal experts on that committee, and we have reviewed that piece of legislation that was the basis, came up with a few more recommendations based on things that would have changed in the marketplace and in law since then, and so we now have a list of recommendations to improve that piece of legislation. We are now at the stage where we are identifying competition experts to review the whole package of what we want to do here in this country, and the Attorney General's office is sort of taking over now in terms of that process, in terms of refining the law, and as the Prime Minister would have said in his address, we'll begin a consultation period very shortly for that legislation.
Speaking about the legislation, now that we're now putting this in place, will it not open the door for more competition in industries, for instance, power generation?
So in terms of the competition legislation that we are considering, Electricity and power is not a part of that because ERCA already is the authority that manages electricity and the power industry in the country. And so they are the authority and the board that will continue to regulate that in our country. But as for every other sector except for telecoms and electricity that's already regulated by ERCA, that will come under the new competition legislation. And so broadly speaking, the legislation will encourage and promote new entrants into the marketplace in various industries. However, because of the size of our market, we fully recognize that some industries and companies only survive because there are a few players in the marketplace. And so for those particular industries, what is being encouraged and what we're doing is we're going to push legislation that stops anti-competitive behavior, that stops monopolistic practices, that stops predatory pricing. And so in industries where it may not be possible to have, many players, we're just going to focus on making sure that the players that are in the market don't abuse their dominance. And just one more thing I wanted to add, a question that was asked of Minister Halkitis in terms of retailers possibly increasing the prices after the VAT is slashed. Fully endorse everything that the minister would have said, but to add on to that, we also intend to fully use the Consumer Affairs Department and their price inspectors to again begin monitoring prices in the supermarkets. The Consumer Protection Commission will also have a hand in fielding consumer complaints. So we'll be encouraging consumers to sort of notify the commission of any price gouging that they think is happening or increases in price. And also we're encouraging the public to monitor these things. Again, when the competition legislation is introduced, the Competition Authority is intended to deal with things like this. But until then, the government is just going to monitor and take note, and these are some of the issues that the competition legislation intends to address. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senators Halkitis and Griffin. I didn't say at the beginning that I intended to commit our press briefing to the matters related to the Prime Minister's press or national address last evening. So with that, we end today's briefing, and I look forward to seeing all of you next week. Thank you.